We continue with research. We're going to in sociology. We're going to non-participant observation. When we talk about non-participant observation, it simply means the researcher is far away from the respondents. They don't know the researcher is even observing them. So it's the researcher, him or her, is far away, but he or she is carrying out that research by observing them from a distance. So here I wrote non-participant observation. This involves observing behavior from a distance, which means those observed are not aware that they are being observed. However, there won't be ethical issue, as the researcher cannot simply seek the permission of everyone in a public place. The researcher is not involved. So, one thing about non-participant observation is that the instance of invading people's privacy is not there, because you cannot, just like you're going to a shopping mall. How many people do you want to seek permission for that you are observing them? So for non-participant observation, there's nothing like ethical issues regarding invading people's privacy, because it's a public area. Do you get the point I'm making here? So the observer or the researcher is far away from the people he or she is observing. So what are the strengths of participant observation? The only strength there is accessibility. So I wrote, it increases accessibility, as those observed may not be affected by alternate effects. You know alternate effect, that means you know that the researcher is there. So you know when you understand that the researcher is there, it might change your way, it might change your behavior, because you know you are being observed. Okay. So alternate effect is not in line here. You won't be affected by, because you don't even know you are being observed. So the presence of the researcher is not known to the people who are being observed. So there's no alternate effect, which means you might as well find those people observed in their natural state.
The abnormal.
Do you understand? So it's not affected by alternate effect, and the researcher may be able to objectively study people in a natural setting, because they will still be behaving the way they are supposed to behave, because they don't know that anyone is observing them. So what is the problem about non-participant observation? Yeah, it doesn't allow intimate details, as observing people from afar may not capture the depth, richness, and personal details of their behavior. So the limitation is this: because it's non-participant observation, you might not be able, because you're far away from them, things that happens, you cannot capture the real events. You might not have images, you might not have their voices, why they behave in the way they have behaved. So details about things that happens in that environment, you might not have them. So that is a problem. So as a result of that, it might be difficult for you to replicate it. So most of the time, non-participant observation is difficult to do it again. Like you cannot, it's not reliable, because you cannot still find the same situation the next time you go. So it's not reliable. I think it's clear. So that takes us to research design. So that's all about non-participant observation anyway. So it takes us to research design. Are you there? Okay. For research design, this refers to the overall strategy utilized to answer research questions. So we call it research design because it's a strategy that we have put together to analyze or to find answers to our research questions or hypotheses. So there are 4 stages to research design. The first one is planning. And when we talk about planning, this is where the researcher decides on the strategy. This is the stage of what and how. So the kind of questions you want to, the type of question you want to ask, and the process through which you have to ask these questions. This is done through the planning stage, which is part of the research design. The second one is information gathering. And for information gathering, I wrote, this involves identifying sample to study, conducting an initial sample to study, which means who are those population that you want to, the targeted population. Then the initial pilot study, which is whether to carry on, which is simply the feasibility study, whether to carry on the research or not. That is pilot study. And the next stage is information processing. For information processing, I wrote, this explains that information must be analyzed and interpreted once the data is being put together. So as soon as you gather your information, then you have to process those information, because research is about gathering information. So once you have gathered this information, it has to be processed. And for processing, it means you have to analyze them. Analyze it and ensure that you interpret it. That is the third stage of design, research design. And the last one is evaluation. For evaluation, it involves both internal and external. For internal, it's always about if the research is appropriate. Have you done it the right way? Are you sure that you have not used any unethical situation to put resources together or data together? Are you sure you have not invaded people's privacy? Are you sure confidentiality is there? Are you sure you have done the right thing in terms of legality? Then we have the external, which is the public opinion. So your evaluation is based on internal, which involves how you carry out your research, and external, which is about the public opinion. Is research design clear?
Yes.
Any question about research design? Good. So that takes us to research problem. For the research problem, it starts with the initial stage. So I wrote, at the initial stage, the sociologists will have to make decisions about the topic you want to research upon. Then there are some factors that will determine if you can actually go on with that research or not. So what are the factors? Number one, the personal interest of the researcher. So what's your interest? What do you really want? What makes you to want to do that research? It's one of the things you have to put into consideration. Two, the current interest in the topic, public opinion, and sociologist's view. So what are sociologists talking? What is the trend about that topic? The third one is the funding, the finance available. You need to talk about money too, because research involves money. So you have to understand how you're going to get your fund. And if you are expecting people to fund that project, do you think the financiers will have interest in that topic or not? That is funding. And the last one is the practical factor, which involves the accessibility of the respondents. Are you sure that those that you want to research upon, you have access to them or not? So that's also important. Any question about research problem? So that's about research design and research problem. Any question? Good. So the next stage is the research hypothesis or question. So research, you have to understand if it's a research question, that means it's a research question or an hypothesis. So if it's an hypothesis, then if it's an hypothesis, it means you have to find a suitable research that goes in line with hypothesis. You know, hypothesis is not a theory. Yeah. You have to prove it right before it becomes a theory. So that's why with hypothesis, if it has to be used, then it must be tested, which means using the research method suitable for the purpose.
And supported as
So
well.
that means you need to test it to confirm if it is true or not before it becomes a theory. That is for an hypothesis question. Hypothesis. Then we have the research question. For research question, I wrote, this means methods that bring qualitative data will be appropriate. For example, interview. You know, when it becomes question, it could be interview, it could be questionnaire. So this one means you need qualitative data. Unlike hypothesis, you might need figures, which is quantitative. Figures are needed to get the facts before they become a theory. But for research questions, it is qualitative. That means you have to speak to maybe individuals through interview. Any question about that? Good. So that takes us to collecting data. Once you are done with choosing either hypothesis or questions, the next thing is you gather information. This is collecting data. So here for collecting data, I wrote, as soon as the topic is decided, the researcher needs to identify the people who will be suggested to the research. You want to collect data. So who are those targeted population? Who are those respondents that you really think about? That is collecting data. So when we have to collect data, the next thing that you have to do, because you cannot observe everybody, you cannot question the whole population. So that means you need sampling. So that is where sampling comes in. So sampling. So here I wrote sampling. This is a stage where it is important to reduce or limit the number of respondents, as it is not possible to question or observe the whole population. So start with a sample. So what is a sample? I wrote a sample is a small number of people who belong to the targeted population. So you have a targeted population. So you pick up, you set a sample from them. So that sample is the small number of people that belongs to that targeted population. From your sample, you find your sample frame. From your sample, then you pull out your sampling frame. So sampling frame, I wrote. Sampling frame, this is the researcher's list to specify the population of interest. You have your sample. So from your sample, you get your sampling frame, which that means you are able to figure out those people that you have interest on. through the sample frame.
Sample.
So, however, a sample frame may not automatically mean that the researcher has access to the group. So, when you put up a sample frame, you have drawn up the population to a smaller unit, right? But that does not simply mean you have access to that smaller unit. There are some reasons why you might not have access to those smaller units. Number one, legality. So, when we talk about legality, we're talking about how legal it is, what you are doing. Is it legal or not? So here I wrote, legality, names cannot be revealed by law. So it has to be anonymous. You cannot reveal people's name. You cannot reveal people that you have observed. Or your respondents, you cannot reveal their name. They have to be anonymous. Whatever they tell you, it has to be anonymous. Confidentiality. Records might not be accessible to researchers. Here, maybe some people, you might go to a company and the company will not give you its financial records. So that means you still don't have access to certain things. Privacy. Some people do not like to be observed. So then that means you cannot carry out. Yeah, despite the fact that you have drawn up a smaller group, you cannot still have access to them because they don't want to be observed or studied. I think it's clear. So what are those ways in which you can carry out sampling? So that is what we call sampling techniques. Are you with me? So for sampling techniques I wrote, these are sampling methods that can be used by researchers. It's okay. So the first type of sampling method is random sampling. So when we talk about random sampling, it simply means that through the sampling frame, you give everyone equal opportunity to be chosen. That's random sampling. So everyone has the same chance to be chosen. The next one is sampling, systematic sampling. For systematic sampling, I wrote, it is a probability sampling method in which a random sample with a fixed periodic interval is selected from a large population. We call it systematic because it is not random, but the first thing is, maybe you use a computer, but whatever you do, whatever sample method you use, whatever decision you make, or whatever technique you use at that point in time, it has to be fixed. You cannot change it. So it means not everybody has equal chance. It's systematic. So the system does everything. So it means you might not be able to repeat the next situation. You'll be able to repeat the next situation because it is fixed. I will explain it again. For systematic sampling, it is not the same as random sampling. Though at the end of it, it's going to be done randomly. But the difference between a systematic sampling and a random sampling is that whatever situation you find yourself in, it is fixed. They might use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So after 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it is 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So you will not see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 anymore. You see 6, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And you see 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So the numbers are like that. It will be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No. Do you get it? It is systematic. So everything comes on a system. So you will not repeat the same.
Okay. It doesn't be repeated like
randomly. Random one, you choose anyone has equal chance at the same time. So but for systematic, it is fixed. So the situation would change itself, not you changing the situation. For random sampling, it can be done manually. Yes. But for systematic, the situation will fix itself, which makes it difficult to pick the same people, which makes it difficult to have equal chance like every other person.
Like random, which is equal for everyone.
Which is equal. For systematic, the situation will fix itself automatically. Okay. Is it clear now? Then we have the stratified random sampling. For stratified, this is a form of stratified sampling, but for stratified, this is a form of sample which allows for different characters to be grouped. For stratified, it means you are trying to reduce the numbers of the sample, but you base it on different characteristics.
Like age,
gender, tall, short, yeah. So that is what we call stratified sampling. So then, as soon as you are able to stratify, then you use a random sample on them. It is stratified. First, making the sample based on different characteristics, and afterwards, you randomly picked. Okay. Is it clear? Then we have stratified quota. For stratified quota, it's the same as stratified, but the difference here is that it involves it has a limit amount of numbers that you have to stratify. So for stratified, this is a form of stratified sample, but with specific number. That's why we call it quota. Is it clear? Then we have non-representative sampling. For non-representative sampling, here the researcher does not want to generalize. You know, when you use a sample, you have a targeted population. So those targeted population represents So whatever information you get from them, you generalize it. For sample, you have a targeted population.
Yes.
You have drawn up your sampling frame,
Yeah.
which you have your sample from. You have your sample there, you draw up a sampling frame, right? So whatever you have in your sampling frame, whatever information you have in your sampling frame, that is the you generalize it to be what the population is. But here, we call it non-representative sampling. You don't want to generalize the sample. So that means you choose specific group of people that do not have, you would not generalize. So generalization occurs when you choose specific group of people to represent the whole population.
But non-representative.
Non-representative means those population those targeted sample will not represent the whole population. That's a sample. We call it non-representative sampling. Is it clear? Then the next one is opportunity sampling. For opportunity sampling, we have two situations. We have the best opportunity and the snowball. So for best opportunity, here the researcher finds a situation that makes him or her to choose certain individual that represents or that gives a suitable hypothesis or suitable answer for the hypothesis. Look at what I wrote. This involves deliberately choosing the sample that gives the best opportunity to test the hypothesis. Here there's an hypothesis that you need to test. But mere looking at the sample, you figure out that certain group of people will be best suited for your hypothesis to test.
Oh, okay, but the best suited ones.
So you have chosen these people, this group of people, because they fit in to the hypothesis that you want to test.
Okay.
That is best opportunity sample. Then we have the snowball. For the snowball, it simply means you figure out an individual from that group that has interest in your research. Then that individual shows you others that might have interest too. That's snowball. Do you get it? So I wrote, the researcher identified someone in the targeted population who was willing to participate in their research. And this person then suggests others who are willing to participate. That's snowball. Is snowball clear?
Yes.
Any question about snowball? Good. So we go to pilot studies, which is another form of research. For pilot study, this allows for the various elements to be tested in the research. You know you have your research design. So as soon as your research design is done, the how, the what, the funding, legality, and all the rest, as soon as you put all this together, the elements that tells you to carry on with them is called the pilot study. So the pilot study allows you to know if you can actually go on with the research or not. Is pilot study clear? Then we go to operationalization. For operationalization, this involves the ways in which sociologists make decisions about putting their ideas and concepts into practice. You have your research. This is the research you want to do done. So the next thing is make it operational. How do you make it operational? Those ideas and concepts that are in your mind, you make them empirical. You put them into practice.
Okay.
That is what operationalization is about. Is it clear? Any question about operationalization? Then we go to interpreting the results. To interpret the results, this is the stage where researchers have to analyze their research finding. As research itself does not speak, you make a research. But the research will not speak itself. You have to analyze and interpret the research. That is the stage. So as soon as you are able to do that, it allows you to make your research, to analyze your research, to present your research in terms of the findings. What are those things you are able to put together? Conclusion about your hypothesis or questions. What are your how do you summarize your information? What do you conclude about? What are you able to put together? The limitations. What are the problems you encounter during your research? And what are those things you think you should do better? Suggestion for further research. So, do you think you still need to go further? Do you think you still need to do more research about the topic or not? Then, what do you have to improve in your research design? And that's how you end research. Any question about it?